Hey, what's up, y'all? My name is Dennis Heil, and I am diagnosed with type 2 bipolar disorder with severe depression and high functioning autism. I've been living with bipolar disorder for over 30 years, 15 of which I spent undiagnosed. In 2009, I experienced a depressive psychotic break that led to my diagnosis of type 2 bipolar disorder. I would be diagnosed with autism a few years later. In my podcast, Bluntly Bipolar, I'm going to share with you my experiences and the hard lessons I've learned trying to find some peace and happiness in my life. I hope that by sharing my experiences, others can avoid learning these lessons the hard way. I'm not a mental health professional. I have no qualifications or certifications. All I am is a mental patient with a microphone. You can find Bluntly Bipolar at bluntlybipolar.com or about any podcast distribution service. Listener discretion is advised for heavy topics related to mental health, including suicide, self-harm, and more. This is episode 8, Making Apologies, Brutal Honesty, and a Forklift. As someone who's made an above average amount of mistakes in my life, I have an intimate relationship with apologies. It started when I was a kid in elementary school. I recall getting in trouble for making some stupid comment to a girl in my class, and I got in trouble for it. My teacher made me write an apology. I remember objecting because I didn't understand why I should. In my young autistic brain, an apology was something you made when you regretted an action, and you wanted to fix the mistake. I distinctly remember the exchange we had about it. I remember thinking, well, I'm not sorry. I didn't make a mistake because I meant to do what I did, so why would I apologize? It was a situation where I got one of those do it anyway because I'm an adult and I told you to kind of responses. It didn't make any sense to me at the time. Why would I apologize for something I'm not sorry for? Besides, we were all calling each other names and no one else was upset about it. I wasn't upset about it. Why should she be? It was such a jarring thing that I didn't understand that made the experience really stick with me. What value does an apology have when you're forced to make it? I'm not sorry for what I did. No one's explaining to me why I should be sorry. And yet here I am writing this for another person. You want me to lie to her? So I'm supposed to pretend that I'm sorry or what? And that's where the high functioning autism bumped into the neurotypical thinking. What I didn't understand at the time is that many apologies are made with no real thought behind them. It's a behavior that many have deemed equivalent to a white lie, an appeasement to get someone to stop complaining or avoid repercussions rather than taking responsibility. After all, if it were sincere, there'd be a lot more changed behavior out there than there is, and PR speak apologies wouldn't be normal. But I eventually did feel bad about it, but only after I talked to her. I asked why she wanted an apology, and she explained to me how she thought I was her friend and that my being mean to her had hurt her feelings. Okay, that was fair. I wasn't trying to be mean. Everyone else in the area was doing kid stuff, calling each other names, so it never occurred to me that would hurt her feelings. I'm pretty sure that was also the first time I ran into the whole, but how would you feel if someone did that to you mental block that I have? Because the answer most of the time is I wouldn't feel anything. It didn't hurt my feelings, so why would it hurt yours? That's the low empathy. As I got older, my relationship with apologies and forgiveness continued to be a bit off. It stubbornly held on to the idea that you should only make an apology when you're sorry about what you did. I believe that was the sole purpose of an apology. It seemed to me to be far more disrespectful to make a hollow apology that you didn't mean. I didn't realize it until I was much older that sometimes an apology is sometimes to acknowledge another person's pain. So let me give you a clear example. Early on, when I started talking about my life with mental illness, I had a lot of people say things like, I'm sorry, or I'm sorry that you had to go through that. I did not see that as someone with empathy expressing sorrow for my suffering. I interpreted it as pity, which would start stirring the anger, so I would get defensive about it. Because what am I, a lost puppy dog? I don't need your fucking pity. But it wasn't pity. It was just sympathy, which is a totally normal thing for most people. Eventually, I came to understand that I'm sorry is often used as an expression of sympathy when you can't think of anything better to say. It's easy to feel overwhelmed when someone drops an emotional bomb in your lap and you don't know what to do with it. You want to say something, but you have no idea what to say because you don't want to make the situation worse or make them feel bad. And then you wind up accidentally doing that anyhow because the receiver of the message couldn't hear the nuance through their own correct perceptions about socialization and the rest of the world. Now, before I go on, I need to interject here for a moment to clarify who I'm talking about. I am only talking about people who knowingly make dishonest apologies or white lie apologies. I am not talking about people who feel compelled to apologize because of self esteem issues, domestic abuse, or anything like that. Those are entirely different things because one is a trauma driven behavior and the other is just someone covering their ass. There's a difference between someone who starts apologizing profusely for breaking a glass when it would have gotten them screamed at and beaten versus someone who got caught doing something wrong for the fifth time. That's two entirely different things, and that needs to be acknowledged. If you're someone who reflexively apologizes because it's how you kept yourself safe, I'm not criticizing you for doing what you needed to do to survive. Anyway, being Gen X, I grew up with the whole bumbling husband and dad, happy wife, happy life thing being constantly communicated to me. Don't want to be in the doghouse after all. Don't want to end up on the couch. Again, it never made sense to me until I got older because it was a matter of how relationships were presented versus the reality of it all. That was before I knew about things like weaponized incompetence and learned helplessness. It was long before I realized that a lot of people didn't get married because they liked and valued each other as people. There were plenty who got married because they had a fling and she got pregnant, or other people who get married as a fashion or social statement more than anything else. That actually became harder to navigate with therapy and anger management because a big part of the messaging I received was your emotions are your responsibility to control and manage, no one else's. So if my emotions are my responsibility, aren't your emotions yours? Is that not hypocritical? Why am I apologizing to other people because they're upset about something I said or did when I wasn't trying to be hurtful? Why am I apologizing for something that didn't work out, even though I made every effort to make the right decision with the knowledge and tools I had? It's not hypocritical because those are two different situations. Yes, the general situation is similar in that both would require an apology, but it's like comparing apples to oranges. Like, yeah, they're both fruit, but they aren't the same thing. They say that part of a good apology is change behavior, but no one really addresses when you do something in good faith that hurts someone. I can look back on the situation, not see anything I could have done better, not see any behavior that I could have changed, and would likely do the same thing given the circumstances. What then? And that brings me to brutal honesty. Now, being an autistic edgelord and dumbass when I was younger, I very much bought into the whole tell it like it is thing. And if you can't handle that, then you're just a pussy. Manage your emotions. The fuck's wrong with you? But I recall reading in some random place someone commenting that brutally honest people tended to focus more on the brutality than the honesty because they were more interested in being mean than helping. That sparked a recognition that, hey, maybe I should re examine this. Was I just being mean because I felt self righteous because someone else had a flaw or made a mistake? Was I taking a mistake as permission to just be an obnoxious jackass? And the answer to that question, my friend, is yes. Yes, I was. I had a simmering hostility and anger that constantly bubbled. Even though I had that realization, I didn't know what to do with it for a long time, at least not until I started working in marketing as a writer. What I came to realize is that the way you deliver a message is far more important than what the message actually is. You can speak whatever truth you want, but if you piss off the target audience, they aren't going to listen to you. They're going to get defensive and angry, which just shuts down communication. So I eventually abandoned the whole brutally honest thing in favor of tactful honesty instead. I don't want to be one of those people who just tells people what they want to hear. But at the same time, I don't want to cause any unnecessary distress or suffering to anyone. Unnecessary being the key word, because sometimes you have to hurt feelings or tell someone something they don't want to hear to help them out. Even tactfully, some people can't handle that. Then you have another nuanced phrase that a lot of people don't see any nuance in, and that is, I'm sorry you feel that way. That's viewed as a non-apology or disingenuous, but even that doesn't make 100% sense to me. because it's joining two different motivations to a single action without identifying which motivation caused the action. Let me give you an example. Once upon a time, I was talking to a friend who was complaining about her life. I gently pointed out a series of bad decisions she repeatedly made that led to bad outcomes in her dating, and she cried. I wasn't being brutally honest. I wasn't being insensitive. I was being tactfully honest. I felt bad and I sympathized with her because I know she was struggling with a lot. In that moment, I was sorry for making her feel bad enough that it brought her to tears, but I wasn't sorry for saying it because it was the truth. And that's kind of a weird gray area because I can sincerely feel sorry that I caused someone distress, but I'm not sorry for telling the truth. That's what you're supposed to do in healthy friendships and relationships. Why would I apologize for that? Just to keep the peace? What good is dishonest peace? How can you trust peace when it's built on a lie? And then you have, if you can't say something nice, don't say anything at all. Which again, didn't make a whole lot of sense to me for a long time. Honesty and the truth aren't always nice. Even if you wrap them in sugarcoating, it can still be hurtful because you're usually addressing something you perceive to be a flaw, weakness, or sensitivity. Now, I can acknowledge that I may just be too deep in the tism and focusing too much on detail, but on the other hand, words mean things. If I apologize to someone, it's because I sincerely regret my actions. I hope if they apologize to me, it's because they sincerely regret their actions. I don't want anyone apologizing to me if they don't mean it or just to placate my feelings. And that point of view has dramatically shaped the way I give apologies, ask for forgiveness, and receive forgiveness. So the first thing to understand is this, and there's a lot less apologies to be made when you aren't doing dumb shit. It's a situation where an ounce of prevention is far more valuable than a ton of cure. I want to minimize the number of superficial apologies I would ever be put in a position to make in the first place. I don't want to be in a cycle of apologizing for repeated bad behavior. So that ties in with the whole brutal versus tactful honesty discussion. Before I open my mouth, I stop and I think. I run the situations through 4 filters in the old brain, which isn't something I did for a long time. 1. Was I asked for my opinion? If the answer is no, then I keep my mouth shut. If I'm not sure, like if I'm providing emotional support to someone, I'll just ask, do you want my opinion or are you just venting? Some people just need a sounding board to sort things out. I'm not one of those people personally. It wasn't until after my diagnosis that I fully understood that everyone else isn't wired like I am. I cannot tell by social cues at all, so I have to directly ask, which I feel like neurotypical people should do too. It's way easier when you're not guessing, and it encourages other people to think about and communicate their feelings. 2. Would saying what's on my mind help the person improve the situation? I try not to give unhelpful commentary. Sometimes people just need someone to sympathize with them for a little while to sort out what's going on. If it's not a situation that I can see a way to improve, then I try not to make judgments. I know that I'm only getting one side of the story. If I have questions, I ask. If I have thoughts, again, I will directly ask if they want my thoughts or not. 3. Am I speaking from a place of empowerment or judgment? To me, that's the difference between saying, dude, you're a dumbass, and come on, man, you can do better than that. You have to know your audience. There are some people that need to hear a brutal, dude, you're a dumbass over something softer and more tactful. But even a statement like that isn't necessarily accurate communication. There's one major thing I had to change in my communication style about this, and that was calling an action stupid or dumb. Because in my mind, calling an action stupid is not the same thing as calling the person who did the action stupid. But that's not how a lot of people interpret it. Instead, they interpret it as though you are calling them stupid rather than the action. That doesn't get you anywhere with anyone. It's brutal, not tactful, and as the communicator of the message, it's on me to ensure I'm understood. Now, I know I'm a smart person. I also know that I'm a dumbass because the old brain doesn't fire on all cylinders all the time. For example, when I was younger, I popped a couple of Vicodin in at the start of a work shift to get me through the day while I was working at a lumber yard. It was a day that we weren't supposed to get any deliveries, so I thought it'd be a good day to spend most of my shift high. Instead, we got an unexpected shipment of mold-resistant drywall we had been waiting on for weeks. Because the Mississippi River was flooding, so building supply costs were astronomical and unavailable, pretty much. Now, mind you, this was like 25 years ago, and drywall was Normally like $9, $10 a sheet, but it was going for like $50 a sheet during the flooding because of all the rebuilding. So after I tied an onion to my belt, because that was the style at the time, I approached my manager and let him know that I didn't think it was a good idea to operate heavy machinery because I had taken some cold medicine earlier. He said, you'll be fine, go unload it. So, to make a short story even shorter, I ended up driving a pallet of half-inch drywall through a closed garage door because it never once occurred to me to actually open the garage door. It wasn't until I was driving the forklift toward the closed door where the synapses in my brain finally fired and said, hey, that door isn't open. And then there was some lag, followed by, you better hit the brakes and open the door. Then, by the time I decided to hit the brake, I was already halfway through the door. That was dumbassery from start to finish. The whole situation started from the idiotic decisions to pop painkillers while at work. But does that make me a stupid person? No. It's just one dumb thing I did that I learned from. It's a bad idea to operate heavy machinery while on drugs. Who fucking knew? I feel like someone should give you a warning about that. Maybe put on like bottles or something. Maybe on like a bright yellow sticker that would be impossible to miss. I mean, who could have predicted that taking painkillers and operating a forklift would end badly? I mean, I couldn't. So, I have to remember to be mindful of how other people might feel when I speak. I have to try to consider their feelings when giving critical or constructive feedback. And with that in mind, 4, am I judging their actions or the quality of their character in mind? I have a hard time judging people anymore. Life is hard. There's been a purposeful campaign of making the American public dumber and dumber through gutting education and make us easier to control. Or as George Carlin once put it, they want you smart enough to push the buttons in the factories, but not smart enough to start asking questions. All right, so a person doesn't have good critical thinking skills. Why? Did they grow up neglected? Kept them from focusing in class? Did they have food? Were they too hungry to focus in class? Did they have intellectual learning disabilities that prevented them from learning? Did their parents homeschool them and did a shit job of it? Are they genuinely unintelligent? Why are they unintelligent? Did they suffer brain damage, mental illness? There are so many things that could be at play other than that person just being stupid. So I try not to judge for 2 reasons. The first is that it's not my place. I don't know what brought them to where they are. And the second is a simple fact. You can't unring a bell, meaning you can't take what you say back after you say it. The only thing you can try to do is sweep up the wreckage that careless words leave behind, which is remarkably similar to spending several hours sweeping up $2,500 worth of destroyed drywall. Once you speak your words, you have no further control over how other people receive them. Backtracking with things like, I didn't actually mean that, or I didn't mean it that way, doesn't unmake the initial harm. An apology doesn't necessarily make the sting go away. The best way to avoid making apologies is to not do wrong things in the first place. However, that becomes valuable in more ways than one. In the times when I do misspeak, I find that folks tend to give me a bit more grace than they used to because I'm intentional with my words. That's made repairing the breaches of trust much easier overall. But Dennis, you're now thinking, because I'm in your head, making you think these words, how do I actually make a quality apology? I'm glad I forced you to think that. So the first thing I do is I ask myself, am I actually apologetic for my action, or do I just feel a pang because my words hurt their feelings? Did I make a wrong action? Now, I define a wrong action as dishonesty, attacking them as a person, attacking inherent qualities that may be hard for them to change, or anything that wouldn't align with Stoic virtue. Is it just? Is it brave? Is it wise? Is it in moderation? If I don't regret my action or can't be made to understand why my action was wrong, then I just don't apologize. I don't give superficial apologies. If I apologize to someone, it's because I mean it. The second thing I do is create the space for a genuine apology to take place. I stop what I'm doing and I ask the person I've wronged for a few minutes of their time. I turn off the phones, stop multitasking or doing anything else, and I focus solely on the other person for the duration of the apology and the conversation that usually follows. I make sure there is some time after the apology to talk to sort things out. The third thing is probably less important for other people, but more satisfies my whole word autism thing that I have going on, and that is by not using the words "I'm sorry" for serious matters. I feel like that's so informal for like genuine regret, but I'm like 99.83% sure that's just my autism being finicky. Instead, I opt for eye contact and I apologize for my actions by saying something like, I apologize for getting high and driving the forklift through the garage door. I did not intend for that to happen, and I will fix it if I can by doing X, Y, and Z. I think it's important to have a plan in mind on how to mend the rift that my wrong action created before approaching this conversation. That way, I don't have to offload the emotional labor of making the person I wronged to think about how I need to fix it for them. If I know the problem and I generally regret my actions, then I don't find it difficult to come up with potential solutions. If you're stuck for ideas, I find the best way to look at the situation is to ask, how can I make them whole again? That is, return them to the state they were in before my wrong action, and with a little something extra for the inconvenience. That is, if it's something I can directly fix, I will. Like if I break a thing, I'll replace the thing and then add a bit more on top of it. Of course, there's a lot of things you can't do that with. In a situation like saying something in kind that I didn't mean, it becomes a matter of a joint approach in resolving the issue as well as making sure it doesn't happen again. But in the course of trying to find resolutions, I ask myself, what could I have done better? What would have been a more preferable outcome? And then I try to find a way to make a preferable outcome for the other person stand out and work. After I make the apology, I will then pitch whatever solution I've come up with to try to fix the problem and make it up to them. A sincere apology involves genuine effort to not only fix the damage, but also to not repeat the same mistakes. This is a situation where the saying, an apology without changed behavior is just manipulation, is relevant. Now, depending on the circumstances, I will then also add something like, you don't have to forgive me right now or ever. I just want you to know that I regret my actions and I apologize for any harm or suffering I caused you. I would encourage you not to forgive until you're no longer mad about the situation. I don't forgive anyone until I'm over whatever happened or they've made a good faith attempt to fix it. After that point, unless it's a repeated behavior, I will never bring it up again. Forgive and forget. People make mistakes. In my mind, if they take responsibility for it, try to fix it, and try to change, then I'm not going to hold it over their head. But what if it's not something easily fixed? Then I look at whether or not the person is genuinely trying or not. You can't succeed if you don't try. And that brings me to a far more difficult subject, and that is forgiveness surrounding trauma and mental illness, because there are a lot of hurdles there. As someone with bipolar disorder, I am all too familiar with doing things that are entirely out of character, things that I never would have done if I wasn't mentally ill. Now, I believe that this situation requires radical honesty with myself to separate what was just a bad decision I made and what was a decision my mental illness made for me. Because to me, that changes the context and the content of the apology. And with mental illness, the stakes are much higher than they would be if you just made a random mistake. Context matters. So let's consider a fictional example. Let's say I'm dating someone with bipolar disorder. The relationship is going great, everything is going swimmingly, but she starts to destabilize and quits her job. She relapses in her alcoholism, starts drinking to cope, starts feeling more impulsiveness and hypersexual from the escalation, and winds up cheating while manic. There's a lot of betrayal and a lot to apologize for and forgive in that example. But as someone who has bipolar disorder, who has had my brain utterly betray me to the point where it's impossible for me to make rational decisions in psychosis, I don't believe it'd be that hard for me to forgive that because I've experienced similar. I'm fully aware that kind of thing can happen when you have bipolar disorder. Even if she acted in a way that was purely meant to hurt me, I still wouldn't see that as her genuine feelings because she was manic at the time. Mania can make you extremely hostile, paranoid, and all other kinds of difficult things that can drive a wedge into your personal relationships. I would be more interested in how she feels after the unwell cycle ends. How does she feel then? What are her perceptions then? Because you can't trust emotions or actions derived from instability, whether they're positive or not. Like, if you meet the love of your life out of nowhere one day, see no red flags, and see no reason to take any kind of precautions, it would be a bad idea to trust those brilliant feelings. Because when that unwellness ends, you'll left stand there with no idea what to do or how to proceed. And there's an uncommon myth that I've seen circulated in supporter communities that some people believe that people with bipolar disorder are acting on their true desires. I mean, it's possible, but it's more likely that the mental illness fabricated or distorted the emotions and spurred the action on. That's not a failing of character. That's mental illness creating the emotions in a reality that she's responding to as though it were real, because it is real to her. How would you even begin to approach forgiveness in that kind of situation? Could you even? I may be understanding, but I'm not going to commit to having my life turned inside out regularly by letting the disorder run wild. I want to see that they're willing to try treatment in compliance with said treatment. I know exactly how devastating this illness is when it's left to its own devices. And I'm not going to stand in the blast radius because I do learn from my mistakes after like the third or fourth time I've made them. Otherwise, I'll just be waiting for everything to explode again. I know the treatment doesn't work well for everyone. I know some people don't have success for years with it. However, I also know that you cannot succeed if you don't try at all. And the only way you have to go is down if you don't. For most of us, it'll most likely get worse with time if left untreated. Remember, untreated bipolar disorder gets worse with age. And if they don't want to, well, that's a decision to make for themselves. And I don't have to stick around to wait for the next explosion. You can't force someone to want to do all the work that goes into building wellness and stability, because it is a lot of work. It's a lot of doing things you don't want to do. But that's the hand I've been dealt, so that's the hand that I have to play. But let me put myself in my fictional partner's position for a minute. What if I did all of that? How'd I apologize for it? Well, first, I'd acknowledge the reality of the situation. I have to stop and think, why did I cheat? Am I genuinely done with the relationship, or am I horrified with my own actions because they were driven by delusion and impulsiveness? It's a devastating feeling to do something so heavy, so awful to someone you love, and it's just not in your power to stop it. I look back on the ashes of relationships that people with my mental illness harmed and can't help but feel sorrow for it all. And then you have the pain of betrayal to handle. Romantic love is just a chemical process that happens in the brain. It can be hijacked, distorted, twisted, warped, or fabricated out of nothing like any other emotion by mental illness. In fact, one of the more common times that people get triggered into unwellness is because of those chemical processes. You meet someone new, you vibe well together, you have a lot of chemistry, and then all those feel-good chemicals trigger you into hypomania or mania. The same thing can happen with the fight or flight reflex, which I've experienced a couple times. You feel all this brightness, all this euphoria. This is what the stories talk about, that pure, romantic, blinding love, a soulmate, storybook romance. But it's not. It's just mental illness, a fabrication of delusion from an unwell mind. And you know what? I'd be willing to bet your bank account that style of romantic story was inspired by someone's manic cycle. It just fits so well. You meet someone you fall instantly in love with, ignore any red flags because of the impulsiveness, get married immediately, then end the story at, oh, so they lived happily ever after. I'd be interested in seeing what the story was like a year after happily ever after. I was just living my life, and all of a sudden my soulmate just came out of nowhere. But now it's like a year later, you moved in together 10 months ago, you got married 6 months ago, someone's pregnant because you were oh so certain you found your person for life, right up until you crash hard out of that unwell cycle and you're left looking at this person who is essentially a stranger. You may not even like them as a person. Said none of it is valid. It was produced by the mental illness. It was real in the sense that the mental illness caused that person to absolutely believe these feelings as an absolute truth, but it wasn't valid because it did not come from a well and balanced mind. And so you're left sweeping up the shattered drywall that is both of your lives. They're confused because what happened to this person that I was so madly in love with, that was so madly in love with me all this time? Why are they so different now? Then they may start applying pressure for you to be the person that you were while escalated, upbeat, bubbly, full of life of the party, adventurous. But maybe that's not who you are. Instead, they say things like, I liked you so much better before this happened and before the medication. Do you really need that? It stole your shine so much. How do you make an apology for something that extreme? Something that you did while you were unwell because you just couldn't make better decisions because of your mental illness? This is how I would approach it. The first thing I would do is go into the conversation knowing that it will be difficult, if not impossible, to fix that level of betrayal. Can people recover from infidelity? Sure, there are some who can. But trust is like a broken mirror. You can glue it back together to make a whole again, but it's never going to be like it was. It will be different. Regardless of the reasons or the circumstances, an affair destroys trust and traumatizes people. There will always be some listener in the back of the betrayed's mind wondering, what if they're doing it again? What if it happens again? The fact that it happened while I was out of my mind really doesn't change that. I can't control how other people receive or feel about my actions, regardless of why I did them. The second thing I would do is to apologize for my actions with a caveat. Now, in standard discussion, you hear things like an apology that includes the word but isn't a real apology, or an apology without change behavior is manipulation. But I know that even if I comply with treatment, circumstances change. Life changes. I'll have bipolar disorder for the rest of my life, and I can't promise this won't happen again. Maybe my medication will start to slip. Maybe I'll get in an accident or medical emergency and not be able to take my meds. Maybe I'll have hormonal changes that change the way the medication works for me so it stops working. Maybe I'll have a breakthrough cycle and not realize it until it's too late. That is, a breakthrough cycle happens when the mental illness overpowers the medication, which happens often enough that they have a name for it. Plus, it assumes that the medication will work perfectly from the start and that the side effects will be manageable. It may not work perfectly. The side effects may not be manageable. The only thing I could truly promise in that situation is to try to make sure it doesn't happen again. That may mean complying with treatment, getting sober, trying to make the most out of therapy, or whatever. I have to be just as committed to that path as I would need to be to rebuild the broken trust and betrayal of my partner. Could it happen again? Yeah. Yeah, it could. Doesn't mean it will, but I wouldn't blame her for not wanting to live with that hanging over a relationship. Sometimes life just doesn't stand a chance against the unwellness, much like an aluminum garage door stands no chance against a 5-ton forklift. Now, as painful as that is and sounds, and as almost flippant as I think it sounds, it's not because I don't care. It's because I compare my bad times in life to the times when I was actively suicidal, psychotic, and out of my mind. If I'm not in that mental space, then I know everything will be all right, sooner or later. It'll hurt for a while, but as long as I don't think I'm receiving messages from God or contemplating hurting myself, then I'll be fine. It may suck, but I'll be all right. Now, the final component is to give them the space to make their own decision for themselves. I will not beg or try to persuade, no matter how much my own heart hurts. I'll support whatever decision they make for their own life, even if that's walking away. I also extend them the grace to make their own decision. If they choose to stay, then that is their choice. It is not up to me to persuade them not to. Now, there's one last situation I want to specifically touch on, and that is older folks with mental illness who aren't diagnosed until later in life. Because on my journey through life, I've seen on more than a few occasions where an older person is diagnosed, starts to make progress on the recovery, but then they're confused why their family or children aren't happy for them. Mental health professionals and ideologues tell us a lot of comforting white lies that, in my opinion, make it harder for us to actually succeed. One obscured truth I feel is so important to understand for recovery and relationships in general is how important it is to understand that our unwellness can be extremely traumatic to the people around us. Hell, I gave myself PTSD from my own psychotic break. But what happens if those people dare speak up? Well, they're told they need to be more understanding and more sympathetic. They're told that it's not our fault, which is an imprecise message. I may not have chosen to do this wrong action. My mental illness chose it for me. I did not purposely choose to be malicious, but it is my fault in the context that it was by my hands and my actions that it happened, driven by my mental illness. Did I want to do it? No. Did I have a choice in the matter? Also no. It's the difference between accidentally driving a forklift through a garage door because you're high versus getting pissed off and embracing your inner killdozer. A series of bad choices and immaturity led to the destruction I caused. However, if I act with intention and sound mind, that's a whole different thing. It's wonderful when someone finally makes progress and starts realizing they can be better. It can feel like a cause to celebrate, but your loved ones may not be so keen to celebrate just yet. That doesn't mean they won't, all right? That's important because it means you can't walk into the situation expecting them to be all smiles and happy for you, especially if you had a hard time with compliance before. Promises carry no weight when they haven't been previously kept. I'm ready to be well now doesn't mean anything if you have a habit of quitting your meds and therapy when you're feeling better. You have to demonstrate consistent effort. And I can't remember if I told the story or not, but I had this epiphany while talking about life with some coworkers at a previous job. It somehow came around to mental illness, and I mentioned I had bipolar disorder, and that managed to trigger a coworker of mine. He was yelling at me about some very specific wrong actions that I must have done because he believed that all bipolar people are evil and selfish. It took me far too long to realize that he was yelling at his father, not me. Now, if I found myself in that position and had to ask forgiveness, I would approach it like this. I apologize for any difficult or suffering I put you through. If there's any way I can help you on your own path, I'll do what I can. I'd offer to go to family marriage therapy with them if they want to sort through that wreckage and try to help them find a resolution for whatever pain they're carrying because of me. Then I would follow through, comply with my own treatment, and strive to be better. I wouldn't put any kind of emotional load on them or expectations in the situation. No asking, was I a good parent or sibling, or am I a good spouse, or try to soothe my own guilt. I'll handle that in personal therapy if I can, or journal about it if I can. That way I can create the space they need to heal and pour my energy into them as much as I can. Granted, not everyone's going to be able to do that, but I can always try. Because as depressing or as difficult as that may sound, I spent years running a bipolar-oriented blog where a majority of my readers were the loved ones of mentally ill people just trying to figure out what the fuck was going on. Before that, I was deep into the depression-fueled nihilism that no one really gave that much of a shit. But what I saw and heard over and over, both there and the paths I've walked in life, is that most people want to be understanding and kind. They want to forgive. But at the same time, their suffering is not treated with the respect and the acknowledgement it deserves. It's not a contest. You can be compassionate for other people without trying to shift blame or avoid responsibility. You can be compassionate without minimizing another's pain or turning it into the suffering Olympics. I cannot tell you how many times I've heard parents, spouses, siblings say something to the effect of, I wish they would just try. Instead, they get shut down, their pain minimized, and they get angry. And in my opinion, that's where the majority of bipolar stigma comes from. It doesn't come from some random show or movie that aired 20 years ago that a majority of people never saw. In fact, I've never seen a depiction of bipolar disorder that I couldn't see happening at this point. Now, I think it comes from people like my previous coworker who have legitimate reason to fear us. People who are angry because their trauma is telling them to defend themselves, to keep themselves safe, because they aren't a scared little boy anymore who can't defend himself or his family. So just try if you can. I know that not everyone has access to services they need, but if you do, just try. It goes a long way. Then you can hold space and help the people you want to reconnect with find their own peace with their experiences. Now, if that sounds really complicated, that's because it is. You're not likely to unravel all this on your own. I would highly encourage you to do this work with the help of a family therapist, to be a mediator and guide through the process. It will help to have a knowledgeable, neutral third party that can ensure everyone will be heard. I would highly encourage you to speak to an individual therapist too, so they can help process your own guilt, regret, and remorse. Apologies are such a strange thing, but they are the first step on the path of rebuilding trust and intimacy. I encourage you to think about your own apologies and how you make them, when it's serious and when it's not that serious. Take it from someone who's fucked up a lot. An apology with changed or considerate behavior goes a long way. Thank you for your time. Do subscribe and share this with someone you think it might help. Please consider leaving an honest review or rating on your platform of choice. Have a good one.